Hi, this is James Page at the FTTH Conference 2025 here in Amsterdam. And we've managed to find some time to talk to Robert Mourik from BEREC. Robert's been talking on a panel here in Amsterdam, all on policy and regulation. And we want to try and get under the skin of that a little bit. But it's lovely to see you, Robert.
Nice to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Now, your panel session was lively, lots of things being discussed. It was about fibre and rollout and where regulation and policy fits in. So if I can start with maybe a slightly provocative question, is regulation actually helping to speed up deployment, or is it holding things back?
I think neither. I think we have done, under the current regulation, and I'm a glass half full person, we've done an awful lot over the last 10 years. Look at this. In Spain, fibre rollout is more or less complete. In Portugal's fibre rollout is more or less complete. France is almost there. Sweden is almost there. Here in the Netherlands, things are rolling out. In my own country, in Ireland, we think to have 100% fibre coverage in 27. You can't say that fibre rollout under the current framework has been a disaster or a problem. In fact, the current framework says that regulators need to promote competition, and that stimulates investment, and they have to promote investment itself. And they often do that by making sure that new technologies are not stifled with regulation. So they have taken a back seat already, and that is working. So we can definitely improve regulation further, but I wouldn't say that regulation is the main stumbling block for fiber rollout. I'm mainly talking about telecom regulation here. Regulation is, if you're a company, you have to deal with competition law, you have to deal with data protection legislation, with so many other pieces of legislation. And I think we need to look at all these adjacent pieces of legislation as well to see what could be holding it up. But again, if we didn't have those lofty EU targets of 100% fibre coverage by 2030, we would be saying, isn't it fantastic what we have achieved? It's only that we are kind of disenchanted or thinking that it is not as good because we measure it against 100% in 2030. There are a couple of countries where the rollout is a bit slower, and not unimportant countries like Germany. And the main problem there is that the rollout is extremely expensive because they dig the cables in the ground, so you have to open every street in order to roll out fiber. In a lot of other countries, they've got poles or they've got ducts under the ground. And secondly, the German copper network delivers speeds of about 100 megabits. So there is very little demand from customers at this moment. They say, well, what I have is good enough. I'm pretty happy. So if there is one thing, it's the thing that regulation it's very difficult for regulation to conjure up, and that's demand.
Sure.
And therefore, in Germany, if you look at the facts with expensive rollout, good copper network, and therefore an underwhelming demand for fiber,
The incentive isn't there in the same way.
That is a problem. So, long story short, what we see in Europe is, in my view, very encouraging. We're not there yet, but I think in the coming few years, a lot of more progress will be made. And we also need to kind of think how to stimulate demand.
Sure. I think you see from the FTTH Council's market panorama and reports they've done on copper switch off, etc., and things we learned from the Balkans conference last year, that there is that differing picture across Europe, and you cover a whole lot of areas. But you mentioned copper switch off. Is that an area of particular concern, or would it be getting that 100% to the rural areas? Is there anything in particular that you think is needing most attention?
Yeah, that varies a little bit from country to country. In Germany, it's kind of the business case overall. In other countries, it is rollout is going quite well. In cities, for example, well, what do we do with the countryside? I think this is beyond what regulators can do, but in some countries, you know, governments need to step in and deal with the expensive rollout in the countryside, for example. Normally, copper switch off, as a regulator, we have a rolling copper switch off. In other words, that it happens in an organized and in organized way. In other words, that nobody is left uncovered as a result of copper switch off. But in the end, those networks that have to be switched off, those copper networks, are owned by a telecom company. And we cannot just say to that telecom company, get rid of your copper. You know, that's a business case decision, that's whatever. But normally, their incentives are aligned with ours. Because if you have a fiber network, you want to fill that with customers. So you're going to plan an exit strategy for your copper network. And all we do as regulators is make sure that that is well planned, well thought through, that customers are getting enough time and getting all the information that they need. But normally that should not be a real bone of contention. In Ireland, the incumbent, for example, is quite happy to work with us on how best to do that. Where it is a problem, of course, if we put a target of a copper switch off in a country like Germany, where there is no fiber network everywhere yet, you cannot use the copper switch off, in my opinion, the copper switch off target as a way to really force an operator to invest. That makes an industry weaker rather than stronger.
And potentially runs the risk of leaving gaps where they've been switched off.
Yeah, so I think, exactly, and you need to have a strategy that, of course, doesn't leave customers in the lurch. So it's very much one that needs to be looked at on a country by country basis, where you know how the rollout of fiber has happened. But yeah, it's not a bad thing sometimes to say, listen, we want to create demand, and therefore we need to switch copper off relatively quickly.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I mean, understanding the point about telecoms regulation being there, and there'll be lots of other areas that you may not be able to cover, but there's a lot of interesting stuff being talked about and looking to the future at this conference and thinking about where the industry's going. Is there anything that you're looking at coming down the line? AI being the big thing that everybody's talked about, but can you do anything in terms of telecoms to regulate the use of AI in these kind of sectors?
Well, we are at the moment as regulators getting a lot more new tasks from Europe, and our governments, of course, give us those tasks through implementation of that European legislation. But we are seeing new security legislation coming through. That's the famous NIS2 directive. We have a Data Act. We've got the Artificial Intelligence Act. So regulators are starting to kind of go beyond that traditional remit of telecom legislation and start to look at all those other pieces. And that is a huge challenge for us, because we need to get people and expertise in and organize ourselves for that, and that is not easy, because those people that know something about artificial intelligence, they're not that easy to find, and to have to find them based on civil service salaries is another challenge. So yes, there is a lot is happening, and then besides that, the European Commission is is revising or revisiting the telecoms framework. By the end of the year, we hope to have a proposal for a new framework that keeps us busy as well. So it's putting all those building blocks in place at the same time that is a real challenge for many of the regulators.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a busy man, and so are your colleagues at BEREC. Look, Robert, that was fantastic. We covered a lot of information in a relatively short space of time, and it was a great session this afternoon as well. So look, I appreciate you having some time to talk to us in a bit more detail. Robert, thank you.
Thank you very much.